So, believe it or not, we learned a lot in that first landscape video. We learned about painting under layers versus painting the actual textures and the details. We learned about creating the shapes when you are trying to break everything apart and when you are doing your pre-sketch. And we're going to start this one the same way, but we're going to learn some very different things. So in this one, we're going to learn about having a specific light source and trying to get that kind of radiating sunlight to show. We're also going to learn about grass textures, and we're going to learn about those fun kind of wispy clouds that you sometimes see, and those are called cirrus clouds. It's actually named after loops in your hair because it looks like wispy flyaway hairs. So let's get started here. Now, this one, just like our last one, the horizon line is a little less than halfway through. So we're just going to put that line, and I am basically incapable of drawing a straight line, so that's why I tend to do back and forth, because then it's a little bit of a thicker line, but it ends up giving me more of an idea of where that straight line is, and I don't end up with it being kind of crooked. You can also always use a ruler. I just don't happen to have one right now. And then breaking this apart is going to be pretty easy because it's basically half and half. And then we've got some kind of trees over here, and we've got some kind of trees over here. And that's about it. Everything else is going to be done with paint. So when I say a pre-sketch, I don't mean you have to draw out all the individual little blades of grass and everything like that, because if you do that, you're kind of wasting effort. As soon as you put the paint over it, it's all going to kind of disappear. So pre-sketch should just be blocking off where you want to put your color. Now we're going to start with the sky again, and we are going to grab some blue. Now I have like a teal blue and I have a cobalt, like a deep blue, and neither of those are exactly sky blue. But if I take the teal blue and mix it with a little bit of white, it lightens it up. And then we are also going to be spreading it out, so I'm not too worried if it's a little bit on the darker side up top. So we're going to start at the top like we did in the last one. Put a bunch of color up on top. And don't worry about where the clouds are, we'll deal with that later. So, bunch of color. I didn't wet my brush quite enough, so bear with me here. Alright, so then when you have that block of color, then we're going to start bringing it down. And it does tend to work the best if you keep following that horizon line, kind of like we did with the water. However, when you get to the edges, sometimes you do need to bring it down vertically, but you can always pull that across again so that you can keep that keep those lines nice and clean. And sometimes it helps also to grab that color from the top and bring it down and then spread it. Alright, now because we've got the sun right here, it is kind of, the yellow in the sun is kind of catching the blue here and turning it a little bit green right on this, like just above the horizon line. Down here it's almost white, right? So we got a little bit more yellow down here, but we don't really want to add too much color onto that. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to take some green and then I am going to mix it in with the white so that it's real light, and I'm actually mixing it in with the white on top of the blue that I had already mixed so that it's a little bit more of like a turquoisey color. And I'm going to add just a little bit on here. You don't want to add thick color because we're going to be spreading it out, and if you have too much color it's going to kind of wash out your entire painting. And this might take a couple of tries if you've never done it before, and that is totally fine. But then we're going to grab this, we're going to bring it up, and we're going to bring it down so that we can mix it in with the blue and we can drop it down to this horizon line. Take some water and just kind of spread it like this. Now whenever you see lines that are kind of sticking, make sure you put some water on there so you can spread it out so that you don't end up with lines like this in your sky. That's for the purposes of this style of painting. If we were doing impressionistic paintings and you wanted to see all of those brush strokes and lines, that is totally fine, but that's just a different kind of painting. And don't worry if you get some chunks of paper kind of forming, that's fine. It's not really an issue until you tear through your paper, but watercolors, you're going to end up doing that because you're doing a lot of mixing it around and playing with it. Now I'm going to grab some yellow. I'm going to grab my yellow ochre, which is that yellow-brown color that we talked about last time. If you do not have that color, just mix your yellow with a little dab of brown, and that will create that color. Alright, now I don't know exactly how much of this I have, but the grass down here is that same color, so I'm going to kind of tap it down there so that I can get some of that color off. And then I'm going to just kind of put some on this horizon line here, and then grab some water. Just start pulling it up like this. And if you need more, you can always grab more, but you don't want to start with too much. It's always easier to add more color than to try and take it off. And then I'm just going to kind of put some water in between these two so that I can mix them together a little bit here. Now some of these spots at first glance are going to look like they're basically just still white, and that's totally fine. It's got a little bit of color on it and it doesn't need a lot. Oop, can't hold on to things today, can I? Another option that you could use if you didn't have yellow down here is you could, closer to the sun here, it's a little bit brighter yellow, so you could kind of put some along here to collect from. Now, because we've got a little bit more of that brighter yellow here, I am going to just kind of go back and forth along the outline here. I don't want it in the center at all. I'm going to grab some more from my palette here. In fact, I would rather this color come out more this way than into the center more, because believe it or not, that center part of the sun looks basically white. I put a lot of color over here on accident, so we're gonna spread that around. Just kind of stretch it out, especially side to side. Now side to side it almost creates like lines, but it blends up a little bit more in the picture, so we're going to follow that. For the most part, nature knows what it wants it to look like, so follow the picture. I'm going to brush some of these little pieces of paper off here, and then we'll deal with the rest of the sun later when we're working on the clouds. In the meantime, we're going to start from the back and work our way forward. So we're going to start with these two spots here, which are mostly just like a dark brown. So I'm going to grab some brown here. And we are going to do, because it's in the distance, it's not going to be very detailed. You can't really see it up close, so it's okay if you just do some layers of texture on that brown. You're not going to see every little twig and leaf. Now you can mix your brown with a little bit of black, but don't forget, a little bit of black goes a very long way. And then you'll get a little bit darker brown. You want to keep that towards the bottom, because remember the light is hitting the top of these trees, so the top is going to be lighter than the bottom. Because this is going to be mostly shadow down here. Alright, now we're going to go to the grass. To start off with, we are going to actually take some yellow, and I mean yellow, not the yellow ochre. And we are going to basically coat all of the grass in that yellow. Put some color down, get some water, and spread it out. The more color that you use, the harder it is to take that color off when you need to. So it's easier to put a little bit on and then spread it. And if you get some of this brown up here and bring it down, that's fine. We will work with that. We're going to have lots of brown and stuff in this grass anyway. And this doesn't need to be perfect, it's just a base coat. If we start with a really dark color, then it's going to be really hard to paint over it, especially with watercolors. It's a little easier when you use acrylic, because acrylic actually dries to plastic, so you can paint over it in layers. Whereas with watercolor, it will all blend together. Same thing with oils, so you don't want to start with super dark colors. You can, there are ways to do that, but that usually requires a lot of practice and some training, so this is definitely the easier way to start, because it's just like starting from the back and working your way forward, it's easier to start with the lights and work your way to dark. Alright, so now I'm going to grab a bunch of my yellow ochre. Now up here, you can't really see the grass. I mean, you can see it, but it doesn't look like up front where it looks like grass, correct? So what we're going to do is we're going to take this yellow ochre and we're going to follow that horizon line like this. And then we're going to do something kind of similar to what we did with the water, where we're just going to swipe it back and forth. Some of it might bleed, some of the yellow will go through, that's totally fine. Also, if you're not sure what bleeding means, it means you hit a little spot of water and it grabs the color and kind of branches it out like this. That is totally fine and can actually add to the painting very well if you know how to work with it, and I can teach you that. Alright, so that back part of the grass, we're basically just going to kind of do that. And then I'm going to grab some brown and do the same thing, but you want very little brown, because that's going to be much, much darker. It's going to go a long way. So I'm going to take some brown and put it on the horizon line back here and just lightly brush it over some spots here. I don't want nearly as much of that brown as I have the yellow. And I'm a little more okay with it having a darker line right here because it kind of accentuates that horizon line, but I don't want it really dark down here. And you can have some spots that you decide to darken a little more. Like this spot's a little bit darker, so I'll go ahead and add a little more and accentuate that spot, and that's fine, but you don't want it to be even because nature is never even. Alright, so now we're going to go back to our yellow ochre, and up front here you can actually see all the grass. So we're going to take this and we're going to switch, and instead of going horizontally we're going to go vertically, which is up and down like this. And we're going to just do some swiping like this. And it's okay to use quite a bit of color on this, but you want to kind of go until your brushes run out so that some of the lines are going to be lighter and some of them are going to be darker. Because again, nature is not the same all the way through. The same way that we don't look exactly the same and snowflakes don't look exactly the same, every blade of grass isn't going to look exactly the same. And it's going to catch the light very differently. So, and you can go ahead and kind of play with this, and don't worry about letting that yellow shine through, that's totally fine. And you don't want to bring it all the way up, because remember, this grass in the background is basically already done, so. Now, one thing I see a lot of people doing when they're first learning is they use way too much water. Now, the water is the same as the color, where it's a lot easier to add more than it is to get rid of it. So you don't want to flood your palette with a whole bunch of water, because then you can't get the small amounts of color that you need, and you can't control it as much. And if you start this and you don't like the way it's turning out, you can start over, or you can keep playing with it and editing it. I encourage you to try and fix it before you just start over, because you will learn a lot more from fixing your mistakes than you will from just scrapping it and starting over. However, it There is absolutely no shame in doing a painting more than once. I have paintings that I have painted 5, 6, 7 times because it wasn't quite right the first time that I did it. Alright, now I'm going to grab a little bit of brown, just like I did up there. Now, the way that the light catches the grass, it almost creates, I'm going to take some of my brown off because I think I have too much. It almost creates like lines through the grass like this in the shadows. So I am going to follow that lead and do this. Maybe combine some of them together. I'm going to add some little shadows into the rest of the grass here, but for the most part I'm going to leave the dense shadows and lines. And that's probably, I would guess, caused by like wind moving through, catching the grass and tilting it in very specific directions. On that though, I am just guessing. Now up front, you're going to have longer blades of grass, and then towards the back here, you're going to have shorter little marks, because that grass is farther away, and the farther away something is, the smaller it looks, right? And grass is definitely easier to do with a pretty dry brush. Because then you can get those little wispies. And the grass isn't all going to face the same way either, so it's going to be mostly vertical, but have it tilt a little bit. Yeah, see, I have way too much water on that guy. Your grass is going to be more detailed up front, the closer to the front here that you get. So then you can start putting little curves in it. And if you want to know what this looks like. If you lay in the grass and look out, you can see the blades really, really strongly right in front of your face. But the further out you look, the more it just looks like this back here. Alright, so I am going to grab some of this here, some of that yellow ochre, and go over these front markings here just to layer it a little bit more. The more you layer it, the more it's going to start to look like what you want it to look like. And there is some other kind of plants there with some leaves, so we're going to kind of do some little leaves. And again, spots like this are definitely going to be easier if you switch brushes. For the sake of this, I'm just showing you that you can do all of it with one brush if you need to. And then there is some little bits of green, so I'm going to grab some green. But you don't want a lot of it, so I'm actually mixing it with my yellow ochre here, because it's just like a tinge of green in some of this front grass here. Alright, so then I'm going to do these clouds. Now to start off with clouds, rather than just adding on white, I'm going to encourage you to start by trying to remove color. So let's start in this top corner because there's a nice big cloud up here. So I'm going to get some water, I'm going to put it on the paper, and I'm going to kind of rub it like that. And it'll start to lighten up. Now you can grab a piece of paper towel or tissue paper, toilet paper, something like that, and just kind of rub it off. But if you do that and the rest of your painting is wet, you might remove more than you would like. Okay, so and now with these wispy clouds, you want to make sure that you kind of bring them to a point like this. So as you're removing it, it'll be easier to see how it turns out once it starts to dry. Right. Now this is not something that you're going to be able to do with like acrylic paint. This is, the removing of paint is something that you can kind of only do with watercolors and oil paints. It also sometimes helps to have another piece of paper nearby that you can kind of wipe off on. Alright, so we are going to add some of these clouds in right here. And the edges of clouds regularly catch the colors in the air, so don't worry if you've got some kind of dark edges on those clouds. That'll be fine. And remember, these are cirrus clouds, so you want them to be nice and wispy like this. We'll learn how to paint other kinds of clouds later. So this right here is going to kind of show you why sometimes it's nice to have specific tools. For instance, I'm using watercolor paper, which has a lot of layers to it. So as I'm kind of moving stuff around and scraping, it's not so bad if I get chunks off. If you're using thinner paper like printer paper or something like that, you might want to do this step very lightly or skip it completely and just go straight to the white, which I will show you next. There's always a way to make it work with the supplies that you have. Okay, so then now I am going to grab some white. You want to have quite a bit of that white in there. And I'm going to kind of start with this guy in the center because he's a little bit easier here. And then we're going to do wisps. And you want to try and follow the lines that you made by removing here. So and over the sun. I'm going to go straight across here because your white paint is almost never going to be quite as white as your paper. So cutting across like that is actually going to make it probably look a little bit more on the yellowish side, which is totally fine because you want that sun to have that little bit of yellowish coloring here. And especially with these wispies, it helps to do a little bit at a time so that it doesn't get too thick. Those thick, fluffy clouds are called cumulus clouds, and that's not what we're painting right now. We'll learn those a different day. And it's okay to add some little wispies kind of separate from the clouds, like they're breaking off. All right, there we go.